everyone. My name is Elise Freeman, and I am the curator here at the Minnesota Discovery Center. I would first like to thank all of you for coming to our opening reception tonight. It means the world to myself, to my exhibit team, and the rest of MDC's staff. Oh, sorry, I saw someone waiting. You all help remind us that people do care about their local history and want to help us celebrate its importance. The exhibit that you will see tonight has been in the works for about 2 years. That includes the hours of research, label writing, label rewriting, more label rewriting, and yet even more label rewriting.
And more and more.
And more and more, and then Pam comes in and says, no, this is all wrong. But this time also includes us designing every panel that you will see, choosing the placement of every object, and the application of every vinyl letter to the wall. So let me tell you in brief, creating an exhibit and installing it is not one easy task. So as such, I'm going to embarrass my exhibit team right now. So if you have helped install the exhibit, stand up now. I know you're out there. I know you're out there. Thank you. Audra, where's Audra? Our staff that helped, we have 2 exhibit researchers, Mary and Jason, who are incredible. Anya, our educator, has become an expert at foam core cutting, which is one skill you can take to the bank. And then Rich Soderberg, who's one of our trolley drivers, he helped create a model that you'll see. And then Audra also has helped with all of the vinyl cutting, which, yet again, is extremely irritating. Anyways, having said this, I would also be remiss if I did not thank our buildings and grounds staff. They put up with me and my exhibit team's crazy shenanigans throughout the whole exhibit process, and they did an excellent job, maybe grumbling once or twice, but they are also deserving of our thanks tonight. So lastly, I want to quickly thank all my friends, family, and coworkers who had to put up with me going on and on and on about the 1916 strike and how awesome it is. I promise you that it might stop now, that the exhibit will be opening, but it probably won't, so just bear with me. But anyways, back to the reason that we're here. The exhibit that will be unveiled tonight focuses on the events that occurred in your backyards during the summer of 1916, and shows you why 10,000 miners went on strike to challenge the largest corporation in the world. These miners were not just your ordinary strikers. Most of them were poor immigrants who were not yet citizens, and who could barely speak English, if at all. In spite of this, they risked it all and fought for a better future for their families. I can honestly say that no exhibit that I have worked on has had more direct relevance to today than this one, especially with what we've all gone through this week. As many of us know, the communities of the Iron Range were built from the blood, sweat, and tears of immigrants. Steel monuments like the Golden Gate Bridge were able to be built as a result of Iron Range immigrants.
Solidarity forever, for the Union makes us strong. When the Union's inspiration through the workers' blood shall run, there can be no power greater anywhere beneath the sun. Yet what force on earth is weaker than the feeble strength of one? But the Union makes us strong. Solidarity forever, solidarity forever, solidarity forever.
World War II was won from our iron ore that was mined by immigrants. It is time that we do not run from our history or ignore it. Instead, now is the time to seriously reflect upon it and learn from it, so that the new marginalized groups of today do not feel the same sense of oppression that our Iron Range ancestors felt. So having said all of this, let's get on with our programming tonight. So first, a round of applause for our musicians tonight. So I'll briefly kind of break down what we're going to do. Our exhibit researcher, Jason Skorich, is going to help us. He's going to come down and do a reading of a first-person account of what a daily life, or what a daily day, I guess, would have been like for the Iron Range striker. There we go. And then after that, Pam Brunfelt will be speaking about the struggle for economic justice on the Iron Range. So without further ado, let's begin our commemoration for the 100th anniversary of the 1916 Wasabi Range strike.
Thank you.
Wait, Jason. When are they going to do their
Cool.
song?
Let's do it.
Go ahead, I take that back.
Get it.
Song first. Song first.
Song first, let's do it.
Yeah, we want to honor this occasion with a song that was sang on the Iron Range and Copper Range in Michigan, and Iron Range in Michigan, as well as here in Minnesota, when people were organizing back 100 years or so ago. And this is the IWW anthem, sort of. It's the International. Now we're going to play it once, and the melody, so you get the melody, and then we didn't have enough words for it, but try to share. We're going to sing it in English, and then for those of you who want to dirt and finish, we're going to finish too. And I'll repeat it. Okay, International.
managed to beat Pellin and Tom Rukavina for holding us up that night. I'm going to give us a half day in the life of Carlo Tresca, who was one of the organizers in charge of the strike on the range.
I'm as mild-mannered man as can be, and I've never done them harm that I can see. Still on me they put a ban, and they threw me in the can. They go wild, simply wild over me. They accuse me of rascality, but I can't see why they always pick on me. I'm as gentle as a lamb, but they take me for a ram. They go wild, simply wild over me. Oh, the cop, he went wild over me, and he held his gun where everyone could see. He was breathing rather hard when he saw my union card. He went wild, simply wild over me. Then the jailer went wild over me.
And when we do these exhibits, you can't get in the kind of detail that you'd like to, because people aren't going to sit and read for an hour in your exhibit. So we have to boil things down and simplify things and cut things down. But the kind of history I really like is when you can get a sense of being right there. You can see it, you can hear it, you can smell it. And so I couldn't pass this piece up. We had talked about chopping it up and doing it as sound clips that people could listen to on their phones, but even that doesn't give you the full picture. So this is a half day in the life. What is the first half day? The first half of the day is Carlo Tresca going to Grand Rapids to try to bail out George Anderschein, who's another one of the organizers for the strike, who was a local mining engineer. And Anderschein was important because he was the main organizer who spoke the Slavic languages. Tresca spoke Italian, didn't speak the Slavic languages, so they needed that person, they needed Anderschein to communicate with the Slavic miners. And so the first half of that story is him getting to Grand Rapids, which in 1916 was no mean feat and took some time. And they were unsuccessful because the sheriff was not happy with Tresca, and their presence stirred up a hornet's nest, and that's where we'll pick up the story. There begins now the journey back to Hibbing, a trip I'll never forget as long as I live. It was more than a trip, it was a procession. Our little truck was followed by 2 other cars, with the sheriff in one and a number of armed men in the other. At a distance of 3 blocks from the courthouse, 3 more cars appeared from a side street, filled with men holding rifles in their hands. The 3 cars stretched on either side of us. We were alone, 3 men, followed by 5 cars, filled with armed, hostile keepers of the law. In a few minutes, we were approaching the mining town of Mishawaka. Mr. White again seized my arm and nervously pointed at something ahead. There, at the entrance to the town, 2 columns of men, many of them armed with rifles, were lined on either side of the street watching in silent gloom. White said to me, "This is a lynching party for you." The only thing I could say was, "The sooner, the better." There was no misjudging the character of the groups that awaited us. My chauffeur friend became very excited. Mr. White was becoming whiter and whiter. Both were speechless. I saw that it was up to me to take the initiative. I said to White, "Let me get out of the car and walk back of it very slowly while the chauffeur and you remain in your seats. Let's go through the crowd, facing them calmly. Never mind what happens to me. Take care of yourselves. If this is a lynching party, let me be the victim. If we escape, then we'll get into the car after the danger is over." Thus, our strange procession entered the space between 2 lines of enraged armed men. We heard curses on either side. "Damned agitator." Fists were being clenched. Distorted faces emitted words of insult. Some of the men in the lines were about to throw themselves on us, but I soon discovered one element in the picture which made me breathe more easily. Behind the lines of armed men, I noticed groups of miners in threatening postures. I heard shouts from the distance. "Courage, Tresca! We won't let them hurt you. Hooray for the strike!" I presume that this and our composed demeanor held the crowd in leash. Amidst the storm of shouts, threatening gestures, curses, and general bedlam, we proceeded to the end of the town. The imminent danger was over. We soon reached the county limit, but this time I was back in our truck. The sheriff stood up in his car, surrounded by the 4 other cars, and gave us the last warning. Remember forever that this place is not fit for you. When you come again, I will kill you. Go and keep going." I certainly did keep going for more than an hour until we reached Hibbing, late in the evening with my mission unaccomplished. I was almost ready to say, "This is the end of a perfect day," when I realized that the end of the day was not yet. Passing through Main Street opposite the office of the local paper, we saw boys rushing with shouts of "Extra! Extra!" There it was, printed in fresh black ink. "Clash in Biwabik. Deputy Sheriff murdered." Biwabik was another mining town where the strike was on. The murder of a deputy sheriff was not to be disregarded. There seemed to be more trouble ahead. While I was reading the paper, a crowd of strikers and sympathizers surrounded me, only to confirm the alarming news. 3 strikers had been killed, they told me, and the situation was very bad. I hastily took leave of Mr. White and rushed to the local strike headquarters, only to find the place deserted, closed, and dark. I had the creeping feeling of impending danger. I couldn't rest. I had to go to Virginia, which was the headquarters of the strike committee and also my own headquarters. I asked the chauffeur to drive there. The poor soul replied, "I'll be damned if I do. For God's sake, let's stay here, I'm afraid." I didn't blame the man, but I had to go and was about to take the trolley car. The faithful soul didn't let me go alone, however. "I don't care what happens," he said. "I must go with you." And so we started out for Virginia the very same evening. What a deserted city. What gloom, what an eerie feeling. All stores closed, headquarters deserted, dark, nobody walking in the streets. I was looking around for anyone in the committee. I could find none. Nothing remained for me to do but to go to that little Italian house where I was used to spend my nights. It was a modest one-story frame structure owned by one of the strikers. I used to sleep there because I felt protected. 8 young, strong Italian strikers always slept with me in the same house, all armed with guns and ready for action. They did not sleep all the time either. They kept vigil in turn. I found them on the spot. My first question was about Frank Little, who was among the leaders of the strike. I was particularly concerned about Frank because he hadn't been feeling well. To my consternation, I learned that he had gone to sleep in a hotel, contrary to the advice of my Italian friends. Under given conditions, this was a foolhardy step to say the least. The only thing I could do was to go to his hotel and beg him to go into hiding. I explained to him that owing to the Biwabik situation, there was every likelihood that we would be arrested, that the only thing to do was to stay away. Frank, half asleep, muttered, "You're seeing red, Carlo. You mustn't get excited." When I insisted, he said, "Oh, go to sleep. Leave me alone." "They will come, Frank, and take you." "Ah, let them come. What do I care?" It was rather amusing to see this fighter displaying such a degree of equanimity. He turned his back to me and fell asleep. Still, I did not want to leave him alone. I sent my Italian bodyguards back and took a room in the same hotel, keeping only one man with me, the IWW organizer Gilday, a native-born American. It was about 4 o'clock in the morning when I heard loud knocks at my door and harsh voices shouting, "Get out here." I jumped out of bed asking who it was. Through the window that opened into the corridor, the room was dark while the corridor was lighted, I saw 2 searchlights playing and the muzzles of 2 guns pointed into my room. It was a very interesting play of silhouettes against the opaque glass. I cannot say that I felt comfortable, yet I knew that I had to be firm. I said, "I won't open before I am told who it is." To which a still harsher voice shouted, "You are wanted by the sheriff." When I asked about a warrant, a strange voice replied, "We don't need no warrants for fellas like you." Whereupon I said, "If that's the case, you might as well break the door down at your own risk." And thus we stood in the room, Gilday and I, without lighting the lights, ready to meet the assailants in case they should break the door. It was part of the wisdom to stay inside, away from the window, through which the guns were stretching their threatening muzzles. Soon new voices were added to those outside. There was a tramping of feet, a hubbub of conversation, and a woman's voice screaming at a high pitch, "For heaven's sake, Mr. Tresca, come out and spare the trouble, or else the hotel will suffer damage." To which I replied with all the gallantry I could muster, "Well, madam, I never fail with ladies. If you tell me who is there and tell me the truth, I will open the door." There was some whispering and shuffling behind the door. Then the lady imparted to me the cheerful news that there were outside the door 18 plainclothes men with a chief. The information made it advisable for me to surrender. "Well, madam, if you tell me to open the door, I obey." In the county jail, where we were temporarily interned, we found Sam Scarlett, an IWW organizer, and Frank Little, without a coat, but in a very cheerful mood. "You see," Frank said, "they did spoil my good sleep, those rascals." Before long, detectives and policemen invaded the jail, handcuffed all 4 of us, and took us out without telling us where we were going. As I looked around, I realized that we were being escorted by a large number of policemen and deputy sheriffs armed with rifles. There was little time to meditate, however. It was not long before we reached the little railway station, where we found a special train consisting of an engine and 1 car. We were ordered to enter the car, where we found 4 men, 3 of them handcuffed to each other by the wrists, while the 4th was lying on a bench, badly wounded in the legs. All of them were without coats. Their shirts were badly torn and bespattered with blood. The head of one was bandaged. Nor were the strikers alone. There were the other deputy sheriffs there, and the whole thing bore the marks of something very mysterious. It was all very queer. I was used to the vicissitudes of labor struggles, but the journey in the early morning in a special train was something new. I asked my companions, "Where are we going?" The reply was, "I don't know. I don't care to tell you, but be sure you won't be in Virginia any longer." As the train sped on through meadows sprinkled with dew, amid clumps of trees swaying in the light morning gloom, the tension relaxed. We began to talk to each other. The guards relented, and we soon learned what happened in Biwabik.
Would you have freedom from wage slavery, then join in the grand industrial band? Would you from misery and hunger be free, then come do your share like a man? There is power in the band of working men when they stand hand in hand. That's a power that must rule in every land. One industrial union grand. Would you have mansions of gold in the sky and live in a shack away in the back? Would you have wings up in heaven to fly and starve here with rags?
4 deputy sheriffs had gone to the house of a striker by the name of Philip Masanovich with a warrant for the arrest of one of the boarders. The men of the law were very rough, and they beat up Philip's wife. There were 3 Montenegrin workers boarding in the house. The fellows were former soldiers who had participated in many a war in the Balkans. They were courageous fellows. They could not allow the deputy sheriffs to continue their dastardly acts. So they dashed against the 4 deputy sheriffs, took away their guns, killed one, and severely wounded another. It was a real battle between deputy sheriffs and the strikers, and they were all arrested. These were the 4 men that we had found in the railway car. They were all being conveyed to Duluth to be imprisoned on a charge of murder in the 1st degree. As to little Gilday, Scarlett, and myself, we were also charged with murder, as accessories before the fact. This is why we were all in the car. We were being accused of a murder that took place in our absence in a different town. We were being attached artificially to the murder case in order to eliminate us from the strike picture. It was about 10 o'clock in the morning when we finally landed in the Duluth jail, and I could tell myself that one day of my life had been completed. It was a crowded day indeed. And now we'd love to have Pam. Is your mic ready?
I think so. Good evening, everybody. Before I start, I'm going to do a little propaganda on behalf of this facility. I don't know how many of you know it, but I used to be outraged at what had been done to our museum over the years, and nobody would listen. They are listening, and they are doing marvelous things. And we need to thank them, because this place has been appropriately rechristened the Museum of the Iron Range. And if that doesn't matter, I don't know what does. They always said, well, this should be a tourist attraction. Yeah, on 169. How many tourists travel the 169 corridor? Not very many. Now, if they really wanted a tourist attraction, it should have been on Highway 53. So if it's not a tourist attraction, what's it here for? Us. And it was the ideas of that were lost for a long time. And I want the staff to stand up. Starting with Lisa Vessel. Where is she? She thinks about the day I walked into her office and let her have it. She's a marketing person, and I was skeptical, right? She tells the story often. She also thinks, what would Pam do when she's going to do something? I wish she wouldn't do that, but she does it. Anyway, she's one of my heroes because she gets it. This was never an entertainment complex. It was always a museum. And it should never have stopped being a museum. And she's turned it around. And we need to be very, very grateful to her. The rest of the staff, please stand up or wave from wherever you are. You ever acted on stage, but those spotlights are really annoying. No, because I'll never get back on the stool.
All right.
So, anyway, the staff has done amazing work. And if you go downstairs after you see the exhibit, you will be stunned at the work they've done. They are telling our story. And it's an amazing story, and it deserves to be told. This is not local history. This is not local history. The Iron Range is the basis on which the entire industrial revolution pivoted. And if it hadn't been for the iron in the ground here, we'd be a small regional power yet. And World War II was won because of what was in the ground here.
Oh.
And we helped the United States. In fact, I won't even say helped. I will say we made sure that the United States became the world superpower. This is not a local story. It's a national and international story, and we need to make sure that people know that. We've disappeared from the history books, and it drives me nuts. So the work they're doing here is helping to tell that magnificent story of what our ancestors did. They built America, and most of them never saw what they built. They lived hundreds of miles from an urban center and probably never even got to Minneapolis. And yet, everything that we see in this country today, every skyline, every major bridge, all the trains, all the roads, are a product of this place. So don't ever hang your head for being an Iron Ranger. You walk tall. And every time somebody says, oh, you're from the Iron Range, you say, yes, and I'm proud of it. And then you clue them in. This story behind us is part of that story. And I'm not going to talk about it much because the exhibit's done way too well for me to waste time. There's another group of people who have made what these young people are doing possible. Would the board, members of the board, please stand? I know there's a couple of you here. Lisa and the staff could not do what they do if they didn't have the backing of the board. The board has said, go for it. That is a huge change for this place. And we need to acknowledge what they've done here. This is our place again. And now you have a job to do. You need to become members. The fees are reasonable. $20 for an individual, $40 for a family, and $99 for a discovery pass, and they explain what that's all about. I'm handing these out tonight. I want to see checks. Pass them around. Seriously, if we don't support this place, they can't keep doing what they're doing. If we really want this to be our museum, then we need to step up financially. Okay? So I've gone from a complete critic telling everybody what they should be doing to a complete booster. And we need to keep going. Now, I'll get to my real talk. I told them I was going to do this, and they didn't tell me I couldn't, so I did it. For those of you who don't know who I am, I'm an Iron Range historian, and I teach history and political science at Vermilion Community College. I am a native Iron Ranger, and I used to think I couldn't be a historian of the Iron Range because I couldn't be objective. And I don't care.
From where?
I grew up in Brick. My dad was a miner, my grandfathers were both miners, and my paternal grandfather got blacklisted, and I'm very proud of him. Did I say paternal? I meant maternal. My mom's dad. My grandfather was so radical, he thought the Industrialisti, which was the Finnish IWW newspaper, was too conservative. He subscribed to the Tyrannias, which was the communist newspaper. So whether he was a card-carrying member or not, he was at least a fellow traveler. And when my mom told me, he said he wouldn't let the Industrialisti in his house, I thought, okay. And then I learned that the Industrialisti and the Tyrannias had about this much difference between the two of them. But anyway, I have deep roots, as deep as a lot of people have roots on the Iron Range. And I took it for granted most of my life. And it wasn't until I really thought about the Industrial Revolution that I had the revelation that, wait a minute, we made that possible. And so I've spent most of my adult life researching the Iron Range. I'm not going to talk about this exhibit specifically. I want to talk to you about its legacy. It failed. So what? Or at least it looked like it failed. And then the steel company, which had spent hundreds of thousands of dollars fighting the strikers who were asking for about 25 cents a day more, in December, they gave them what they asked for. And then they began to treat them better. But why did they begin to treat them better? Because of World War I. And the immigration to the United States was cut off by the war. And so they could no longer treat them as industrial cogs in the machine, interchangeable parts. They were suddenly valuable, skilled laborers. And they couldn't be easily replaced anymore. And things began to change. The other thing that began to happen, and this might be the most important of all, is second-generation Americans started to vote. And they no longer cared what the company thought. The open primary was passed, and I haven't been able to find exactly when, and maybe I can get Tommy to look for me sometime. But prior to the open primary, and that's what we still have in this state, you would go to the polls and ask for a Democrat or a Republican ballot. Well, could you really ask for a Democrat ballot? Could you ask, did you even think about asking for a Communist Party ballot? Did you think, could you ask for a Socialist Party ballot? So the legislature enacted an open primary. And now when we go and vote in a primary, each party is listed separately with the rank of their candidates. And so they would get a ballot, and they would go into the voting booth, and the company couldn't see what they were doing. And suddenly, the Republican votes dropped, and the Workers' Party votes went up. And eventually, the Farmer Labor Party rode that wave of Iron Range votes right into office. And the Farmer Labor Party influenced the New Deal. It had such a massive influence on the New Deal that if Floyd B. Olson hadn't died of stomach cancer in 1935, it was highly likely he would have been the vice presidential candidate that year, 1936. The Farmer Labor Party began to put into practice the very issues that the IWW and the communists had been fighting for. And once that began to happen, the Farmer Labor and the Democratic Party began to put in place the things that the miners had been fighting for. They dropped those radical parties. And we are a living legacy of that struggle for economic justice. But it was only achieved once they could do it politically. It's so interesting. And in the meantime, well, at the end of 1916, 1917, by the way, Cuyuna Iron Range was really the most radical of the ranges. Nobody knows that, but it's true. 1917, there was a wave of wildcat strikes on the Cuyuna Iron Range, and they were being spied on all the time. And then after 1917, there were only a couple of tiny little strikes. Hardly make the papers. But in between, they were doing things. Iron Rangers were building a society. I was telling my students this week, Wednesday, I almost took a mental health day. But I decided I had to have courage. My Finnish ancestors would have been appalled if I'd taken a mental health day. I teach state and local government. I can tell you I didn't want to do it. But I started thinking about it, and I realized that something really interesting had happened. If you remember Monday, all the polls were showing Hillary was going to win. Donald, that man, I'm not going to use his name, that man, and if you voted for him, please forgive me, but I'm not using his name. That man even thought he was going to lose. Everybody in this country thought he was going to lose. Needless to say, Tuesday night was not much fun. But I started to think about it, and I realized that there was some relationship to 1916. 1916, there's a famous, or I consider it famous, most people don't even know it exists, but there was a headline in the Crosby Courier, Cuyuna Range miners satisfied. Next week, the headline said, Cuyuna Range strikes. So what happened? It's classic. The elites up here didn't know what was going on down here. And that's what happened on Tuesday. The elites were talking about everything above here, and it looked like a done deal. But underneath here, Americans were saying, And the elites never got that. And I didn't get it until I started thinking about it. That's what happened here. They didn't see the strike coming. They had no idea. If they'd been paying attention, they would have. This contract wage system drove them crazy. It was sweatshop labor. They were paid for the amount of ore they dug out of the ground every year, every month. They got paid once a month. They had to pay for their tools, they had to pay for their dynamite, they had to pay for their blasted caps, they had to pay for their candles. They never knew what their pay packet was going to hold. And John Allard, who I think we should have a statue of some.
In the gloom of mighty cities, midst the roar of whirling wheels, we are toiling on like chattel slaves of old. And our masters hope to keep us ever thus beneath their heels, and to coin our very lifeblood into gold.
But we have a glowing dream of how fair the world will seem when each man can live his life secure and free. When the earth is owned by labor and there's joy and peace for all in the commonwealth of toil that is to be.
They would keep us cowed and beaten, cringing meekly at their feet. They would stand between each worker and his bread. Shall we yield our lives up to them for the bitter crust we eat? Shall we only hope for heaven when we're dead?
But we have a glowing dream of how fair the world will seem when each man can live his life secure and free. When the earth is owned by labor and there's joy and peace for all in the commonwealth of toil that is to be.
They have laid our lives out for us to the utter end of time. Shall we stagger on beneath their heavy load? Shall we let them live forever in their gilded halls of crime, with our children doomed to toil beneath their gold?
But we have a glowing dream.
They called the miners out, mine by mine by mine. The elites were clueless. To carry that idea of the elites a little farther, they thought they were going to create compliant citizens. They didn't know Iron Rangers. They started Americanization programs in the high schools. Now, you can be critical of that if you wish. I'm not. I'm really glad they did it because they turned out a whole lot of American citizens who wouldn't listen and did what they thought was right rather than what the company wanted them to do. But what's really interesting about that is all of these ethnic groups would gather in these classrooms and they would learn English together. And they learned the lingua franca of America, which is English. And because they learned the lingua franca of America, they were now eligible to vote. They could vote for 5 years. So they could start without knowing how to read. And at the end of the 5th year, they had taken enough classes that they could pass the citizenship test, and they were handed their citizenship paper as soon as they passed that test. And then they could vote. Everything changed when they could vote. We should never not vote. We owe it to our ancestors to vote. You heard Jason. There were men willing to die for our rights. It is really, really important that we understand what these men and women, and don't forget that the women were at the heart of it. I've said that they were the center of life on the Iron Range, and I truly believe that, and I'm not a women's historian. I only learn about women's history tangentially to everything else I do. But one of the things I finally figured out is that without women and what they created here on the Iron Range would not have advanced and developed the way it did. And they had their husbands and fathers' backs. And when the men were told they couldn't march down the streets of Virginia, the women and the children went out and marched down the streets of Virginia carrying this sign. And when the scabs were going to go to work, they stopped them outside the boarding houses and took away their lunch pails and opened them up and flung the food at them. They wouldn't let them go to work, and it was women who did that. The women had the men's backs, and that's why that strike could last as long as it did. They were fully engaged in what was going on. So labor strife, the power of the political system led to tremendous changes. But when did we get a union? 1943. How many of you knew that? I was so curious. There had been this strike in 1907. 70% of the Finns on the Iron Range were blacklisted as a result of 1907. If you wondered why they all live in Embarrass and Pike and Zim and Cherry and Cook and Britt, you need to know that. 7 out of 10 were blacklisted. That didn't mean that they stopped being radical. I told you about my grandpa. But, and then 1916 was another strike. I lost my train of thought. 1907, blacklisting. 1960, 1943. I was curious because we'd have these violent strikes and then nothing. How in the world did that happen? So I had to find out. And I went to my Bible of mining, the Skilling's Mining Review, and I started looking through 1943. And on the back page of an issue in July, there was a column about this long, and it said, steel companies signed contract with miners. The real story was the federal government told them to do so. And that was it. That's all it took, was the federal government telling the steel companies that the miners were too important to let them go out on strike. Pretty cool, huh? The War Production Board told them that they had to sign a contract with the miners. Of course, the steel companies had already signed contracts with the steel workers in the plants in 1935 because of the Wagner Act being approved as constitutional. They signed the contracts, but they weren't working here. The miners didn't have any leverage, and so they had to wait until they had leverage. And in 1943, they had a lot of leverage. We mined here in 1942 92 million tons of ore. If you include Minnesota, 70% of the iron ore came from Minnesota. The other 30%, well, the Lake Superior District was 100%. 496 million tons of steel, 413 million tons of iron ore. 70% of that was from Minnesota. In 4 years, with shipping seasons that began in April and ended in November. Think about how fast they were pulling that ore out of the ground. So in 1943, the miners had leverage, and so the contract was signed. As soon as the war ended, there was a wave of strikes all over the country. If you look in the Reader's Guide of periodical literature, there are page after page after page of strikes. And the steel companies tested every single segment of the iron ore industry. There were strikes in every aspect of the iron ore production industry in 1946. Guess what? the companies lost every one of those strikes. And since then, there's been labor peace. So the struggle of these people, these men and women and children, led directly to middle-class existence for our fathers and grandfathers and our parents, and for us. I am the living legacy of this struggle, and everybody else who is a Native Iron Ranger is also a living legacy of this struggle. And we can never forget that. They fought hard for us, and it took time, but they won in the end. We went from being working poor to middle class like that because of the union contract in 1943. We can never ever forget what the battle that they fought. This exhibit is a legacy, is a gift to us to remind us of what that struggle was about. So let's go look at it.
When the union's inspiration through the workers' blood shall run, there can be no power greater anywhere beneath the sun. But what force on earth is weaker than the feeble strength